Welcome to this recording that was taken on Tuesday the 9th of February 2021 to commemorate the feast of St. Josephine Bakhita, whose feast day was a day earlier on the 8th of February. For the past few years, the feast of St. Josephine Bakhita had been celebrated at St. Vincent's Church in Liverpool 1. However, because of the pandemic, we decided to get together with the other justice and peace groups in the pastoral area and facilitate this Zoom talk, which is being given by Sister Imelda Poole, President of RENATE, and also the founding President of Mary Ward Loreto in Albania. And we also invited a local outreach worker, Julia Bayton, from Refugee Women Connect, to lead us in this evening's recording, which was entitled An Economy Without Human Trafficking. My name is Helen Jones, and I'm facilitating this evening's event, and I'm joined by other members of the Liverpool South Justice and Peace Group, namely Terry Phillips, who's also co-chair of the Archdiocese of Liverpool's JNP Commission, Nadine Daniel, who is also on the commission, and our readers for the prayer, Amy Hayes and Father Terry Madden, who is a missionary of Africa. I hope you find this recording useful and informative, and we have tried to put all links to various websites in the information at the bottom of the YouTube channel, or they could be found on the Archdiocese of Liverpool Justice and Peace website, which is at jp.liverpoolcatholic.org.uk. And now we begin this evening, which is a little harrowing, in the presence of God, with a prayer read by Amy.
O God of every family on earth, loving and compassionate God, we come before you in prayer, unable to fully comprehend the horror of women and men and children, transported to unknown places to be exploited and abused because of greed and profit. We are people of many creeds, united in our sadness and our anger. We cry out together against the degrading practice of human trafficking. Our heart is saddened and our spirits angry that their dignity and rights are being transgressed through threats, deception and force. Give us the wisdom and courage to stand up against the evil that makes it possible for people to buy and sell and trade others. Give us the wisdom and courage to stand in solidarity with the victims, that together we will find a way to the freedom that is your gift to all of us. We pray for it to end. Amen.
Thank you, Amy. And now, just to set the scene, there is a short film that we'll see here, which has been put together by RENATE.
We are demanding cheap goods, cheap clothes, cheap services. But who's paying the price for these? Who's paying the real cost?
For about £5 you can get a good, quick car wash. Car washes are associated with exploitation. There's signs that you can see that they're not being paid appropriately. When you have £5 per car, when it works out the hours that they're open and the amount of money they're bringing in, that's quite a lot of workers to divide between the money that's earned with the rental, the materials, everything. So in many cases, the money they earn, even though it's very little in our eyes, it's more than they may earn in their countries of origin. So they're still being able to earn money.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
My brother came to pick me up and said, there is a better life in the United Kingdom. I should come over. When I came, my brother did not give me my passport. He was holding my passport and said, if I obey him, everything will go fine. If I don't obey him, he will deport me to my country so that I will go and continue my suffering. He will introduce me to different people that will be giving me money. After my brother would go to work in the evening, he would call them to the house. But they were not giving me money. Actually, I think they were giving her the money on my behalf. I never knew it was prostitution.
It's a great pleasure that Imelda now will take the spotlight, and we welcome you to our virtual space, Imelda, from Albania. And thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Well, thank you so much, Helen, for that wonderful introduction, and to everybody for this amazing privilege to speak to you in Liverpool and across the world, it would seem. And here am I in Tirana on the eastern part of our European continent, speaking tonight with such pleasure and joy, and hopefully with a kind of meditative approach, as it is the International Day of Prayer Against Human Trafficking that we are celebrating, if you like, through the Feast of St. Bakhita. But indeed, we are also reminded that we are speaking the voice of the survivors and the victims. So our heart does suffer in pain with them. And tonight we'll be walking the walk with them. Just to let you know, I'm a sister of Mary Ward. Mary Ward is commonly known in Britain, actually, as the Loreto sisters. And we have a charism based on the spirituality of St. Ignatius with a feminine twist, which Mary Ward brought to it with the values of freedom, justice, and sincerity. So as with the Jesuit spirituality, our core process, if you like, through the vow of obedience is discernment. And we are women who discern in mission where the greatest good is, and anywhere in the world we could go at the time in the world where the greatest needs are being expressed. So 20 years ago, in fact, I was part of a global initiative by my congregation to discern where each province would go to set up new community outside of our provinces. And in England, we had a little core group that spent a year discerning alongside CAFOD and CIIR and other international organisations in the country to enable us to be more clear about where perhaps we were being led. And it did indeed lead us to Albania. And there, the Archbishop of Tirana, Rockmi Udita, who's now died, actually said to us when we said, well, what do you feel is the mission for us here in Albania? And he called us into the work against human trafficking. And why? It was because many, many Albanians were being taken in speedboats across the Adriatic to Italy, and there they were being sold off for sexual exploitation and into the trade of prostitution. And they would come back, many of them pregnant from rape, and there was no services set up in Albania at the time for this almost like a mini epidemic of women, young girls leaving the country and coming back in such an abused state. So we worked for Caritas and set up a shelter as our first piece of work. And then from that, I was called out to international meetings, which led to the establishment of RENATE in Europe, and about 4 years on to the setting up of the Foundation Mary Ward Loreto. We have networks all over the world of religious sisters working against human trafficking. and they all come under the aegis of the Union of Major Religious Superiors in Rome. And the organisation or umbrella body that keeps us flowing and working together with one voice is called Talitha Cum. And it's Talitha Cum, along with the central bodies of social justice in Rome, that choose the theme each year for this special time around February the 8th, which we are reflecting on tonight. And the theme chosen, which is very close to Pope Francis's heart, but actually was spoken about by John Paul II earlier, is a mission of an economy without trafficking. And what do they mean by that? It means, and I just quote, it means an economy without human trafficking is an economy that values and cares for the human being and of nature. It is inclusive and does not exploit, and especially it does not exploit the most vulnerable. So this is our definition to reflect on tonight. When you look at this picture, it actually gives our reality today. Money is speeding round the world. Stocks and shares, money laundering, corporates sending their money this way and that, shares, stocks. We all know the stories, and the little pictures define that reality, if you like, right across the world, spinning all the time, and sadly exploiting our globe to the degree that we know now that if we don't do something about this economy, not only will the human race be exploited, but already the land is being exploited and we are in decline. We have lost our values and our ethics. We have lost our purpose, because the purpose is for the human being to reach life and have it to the full. But sadly, 3/4 of the world don't ever experience that because they are surviving, really. They're just about surviving. When you think in the States at the moment, something like 1% of all the income in the States is owned by them. And the other 99% have the little bit that's left. So we are in a state where the rich and the poor lands have this massive increase of division between rich and poor. So it's impacting the world, the continents, the countries, and you and me. So if we move on, please. Thank you, Helen. And you can see in the picture, you know, the globe and nature is sinking, and the money grabbers, the greedy, the few, if you like, have control really of all of us in many unusual and unknown secret ways. We know these words about neoliberalism, which is the word that's used since Keynesian capitalism died in 1980, with Carter and Thatcher bringing in a new fiscal policy called neoliberalism. So these words are repeated by politicians all over the world. We have to go into austerity, deregulation, free trade, which has its open markets for good and for bad, privatization, reduction in government spending. It's the key to the future, is what it preaches. And the criticism of it is that it leads to endangering real democracy. Have we really got a voice? Have workers got rights anymore, really? The sovereign nations, it's questionable whether they are self-determined. And as we said before, and we'll say over and over again, the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. I'd like to just quote a text from Christine Lagarde from 2017, when she was the head of the IMF, and she said, The highest earner brings in 1.3 billion in a year. She said that on her watch, as head of IMF in 2017, the theme of growing inequality has become a problem for economic growth and development. In most countries of the world, she said, the big boats have not held up the small ones. Hard work and determination has not kept the small boats afloat. And now we are in a pandemic, and our unsteady economy from before is now cracking even further. And the rich are getting even richer, and the poor are getting even poorer. Our universal call as we move out of pandemic, little by little with hope, is for the world to recover, to restore, and importantly, as we move out, to be renewed, so that a much better world emerges with the common good at its heart. Thanks, Helen. So Pope Francis speaks of, in many of his encyclicals, he goes into this big issue of neoliberalism and the rich getting richer, the poor getting poorer. And this image is a massive indication of what's going on. Not to share one's wealth with the poor is to steal from them and to take away their livelihood. It's not our own goods which we hold, but it's theirs. So money must serve and not rule. John Paul has said, Pope John Paul, a certain capitalist neoliberalism has substantiated the human person to blind market forces. From its centre of power, such neoliberalism often places unbearable burdens on less favoured nations. And then Pope Francis, in Joy of the Gospel, says, we have created new idols. The worship of the ancient golden calf has returned in a new and ruthless guise in the idolatry of money and the dictatorship of an impersonal economy lacking a truly human purpose. I don't know whether any of you listened to the Archers, but there has been a storyline of exploitation and trafficking of the homeless in Britain and used in the construction industry with no wage. They were fed, they were housed, but not fed very well, because we know in the storyline that one, and it led to a gas explosion, was trying to cook something from the hotel where he was working because he was hungry. And it sounded as if he hadn't been fed for some time. And that is a classic example of trafficking in human beings, exploitation of the greedy on the back of the rich. And the storyline goes on, and this is where we all come into reflect now into another phase of our meditation tonight, is who is the guilty? Now, many families in the village used cheap labour without questions. They were blinded, if you like, but they didn't ask the questions, and they all got very good construction work done, cheap, on the cheap, like the film said, cheap goods, cheap services, cheap labour. So for the next 3 or 4 slides, I'd like you to bring to mind your own examples, first of all, before we read this, of what you've read in the newspapers, you know, like the cockle pickers in Lancashire, the sweatshops in Leicestershire, the terrible story of the young girls from a care home. I think there were 2 or 3 care homes in Britain, but one was in Rochdale. And there the girls were hugely abused and exploited sexually by group gangs in the city. These are the stories near our homes. Now I'd like to invite you to open your hearts and your ears to listen and see the pictures of the stories of a survivor, if you like. This is a poem coming from survivors. So you're listening to the survivors who've experienced this exploitation. Move into their hearts and listen to what they're saying and watch the pictures. These are the exploited. And as with Pope Francis has just written a book called Let Us Dare to Dream. And he divides the book into 3 parts. And one is see, which is what we're inviting you to do tonight, to see, just to savor, to break open the story. Then to judge, reflect in your mind, and then to act. And tonight, in the last part of this input, we'll be looking at ways in which we can get involved. But for now, let's just see. Thank you, Helen.
Invite Jed, Justine and Anne to unmute.
Can you see me in the things that you purchase? In a place where the prices there suit you so well? Can you imagine the place where I'm working? No food, no breaks, in a sweatshop, that's hell. Can you see me?
Can you see me in the shadows and darkness, where my body is sold for minutes and hours? Can you imagine the suffering in sex trade, where dreams are stolen and so is my power? Can you see me?
Look, and don't turn away. I'm calling to you and just want to say, see what you can and tell others about me and help to bring freedom and justice for all. Can you see me?
Can you see me in the fields of the farmers? Bribe us to be there and won't set us free. Back-breaking work, no matter the weather, picking and packing your fruit and veggies. Can you see me?
Can you see me in the shed by the highway, where people are harvested for body parts? My brother lost eyes, and I gave a kidney. The dead are just dumped like trash from a cart. Can you see me?
I'm all around you, hidden from vision, wondering if I will ever be free, longing for life and for change you wrote, longing for sunlight, for justice and peace. Can you see me?
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 Thank you, all of you. So often when we listen to the background and the stories of trafficking in human beings, we get the question, well, what can I do? I'll tell you a story to begin this. About a year ago, I popped into the cathedral in Tirana, and there was a youngster sitting in a bench crying. And I could not believe that, well, why wouldn't you believe that somebody who had been so abused and exploited had managed to get into the cathedral from her place of prison. Indeed, she had managed to escape by going out for a cigarette that somebody had given her, and she escaped to the cathedral. She was one of 9 Filipinos that had been duped through an illegal agency in Manila and had been bought over, therefore was in debt bondage, and sold to a hotelier who had 3 or 4 hotels in Albania. And these girls were living in the most horrendous conditions, 9 of them in one room. And they were being shoved in and out of different hotels as the need for them arose. To cut to the end of the story, if you like, she was able to go to a shelter for a year and find her freedom and her strength back, if you like, somewhat. And she wanted to go home. So 2 weeks ago, with the accompaniment of IOM, the International Office of Migration, and the shelter social worker, she was very protected, she was carefully through customs into the plane. However, along the way, her plane journey became very complicated, and I won't give you the detail, but she missed a plane. She wasn't given another plane ticket for the next plane. Perhaps she hadn't the confidence to fight for it. But I started getting emails about 3 days later. And for the last 2 weeks, I've had about 4 or 5 emails a day. She needed that kind of accompaniment. We needed to bring in IOM again and the shelter people and IOM in Philippines when she eventually got there, and then had to go into quarantine. And it was just very complicated. Those are the stories that need to be told. And she hopefully will get strong enough to tell her story to others in the Philippines to prevent them from being duped. But it takes time. The trauma takes time to be healed. There's many stories that we can talk about. But then what can you do first? The first thing is to educate yourself. That's so important. And you can do that online. You can even find out online where the trafficking shelters are and see if you can go to some kind of forum online to learn about trafficking. I know there are people, I've seen you online here, who are already doing awareness raising from our RENATE network in England. So, you know, go into the RENATE website, find out if there are things going on. You'll find out practically all you need to know from the website. Once you've done that, and next thing is to make sure you have the obvious one, which is the helpline number, so that if you do come across it, like in that car wash or in a nail bar, where they're very commonly, or you, as somebody did in England, rescued somebody on a tube because they saw she was not right. And she was able to give her a helpline very fast, and that person did get to escape from her trafficker. So volunteering, therefore, being awake and open and listening, seeing. You can write to your local politician about it, or you can organise a fundraiser for your anti-trafficking organisations in Britain, and there are many doing wonderful, wonderful work in Britain, and against all the odds, because they're all underfunded. Thank you, Helen. So the next thing is that education. Now, cyber trafficking has absolutely exploded during this pandemic. And we are putting on a training on prevention of cyber trafficking of children in May. And in organising this or preparing for this, I met a person online from Germany who works for this across border to Australia, the Philippines, and so on. And he told me that they have many examples of families who are in dire poverty at this time. I mean, really dire poverty, selling their children as young as 7 months to 12. And they are being bought, ordered, if you like, by people from the West who have the money for a single sitting to watch these children being raped or to do any other actions that that person insists upon, if you like. That is going on now. As well as that, we know that children in chat rooms are vulnerable to being exploited sexually. So we need all the parents to be trained and all the schools to be trained against cyber trafficking in whatever way. And we need governments to know what is happening to the poorest of the poor. And what in Albania, we have a situation where they can't pay the rent and the landlords are asking for this service. It's quite diabolical what the practice that is going on. I have to congratulate the Isle of Man and my Liverpool diocese, because I heard from this man in Germany that and also actually it was an organization in England called Inequi, I think Inequi, INEQ, and I can give you the information, Helen, that has an amazing package of education in schools and with apps and toolkits. And I believe all the schools on the Isle of Man have had this training, and the government there has ordered this company to come in and do a blast right through the island so that they're all well aware of what's going on online in the manner of human trafficking and exploitation. So this is very good. So you can all become collaborative, you know, with organizations, with each other, to ensure that there is protection and prevention of human trafficking. Thanks, Helen. And then we've got these 4 very important categories, and I've actually left out here the tourist industry, but we could put them under businesses. But the businesses, even the corporates, can be brought to the front line. And we have a new foundation in England called Anti-Modern Slavery Alliance that bounced off the back of Mary Ward Loreto in Albania, if you like, but it now has a board and trustees and is accepted by the Charities Commission. But that one of the main aims is to bring the corporates to the front line in order that they can give their money to organisations working against human trafficking in Britain. But also there is a big drive to bring businesses to account for what they're about, to account for their practice, right down to the most smallest supply chain that they're using, so that labour trafficking can be controlled, whether it's in the fields, in the fisheries, in the boats, in you know, the factories. These are the supply chains to the big corporates, where the trafficking is going on in a most explosive manner. And in healthcare providers, we have a wonderful young doctor in RENATE who has set up Doctors and Medics Against Trafficking. And she and the group are now trying to ensure that all university students studying medicine have a good module in it of how to prevent human trafficking and spot it, because 65% of victims present themselves to the health service, and even more survivors. So it's there that many could be rescued. Journalists have a wonderful role, and writers, to present the message, to tell the stories. And finally, lawyers, they are the people that can offer legal services to victims. So all in all, we're saying to every human being around the world, please collaborate with us. This is the new anti-trafficking strategy that we all join together. We make our voice much stronger and louder, and we are practical and intelligent, if you like, in our simple ways of responding. So to conclude, I'd just like to repeat what an economy without trafficking is all about. It's about an economy that values and cares for the human being and of nature. It is inclusive and does not exploit even the most vulnerable. Thank you.
What would an economy without human trafficking look like in my country, here in Albania? What would it mean for us? What would it mean for the countless women and men who are lured into jobs that don't exist and end up in slavery, in forced prostitution, in terrible, back-breaking work that pays them a pittance? And for what? To make a better life from themselves, to put food on the table, to give their children an education. What about thousands of children who are forced into begging on the street? Petty crimes, forced labor jobs, to bring back some pence to their poverty-stricken families. If you are asking the same questions about your country, or indeed about our world, we will have answers in common. In Albania, it would mean women feeling safe, women able to trust the promises of decent work. It would mean men happy to do decent work for decent pay. It would mean children going to school, getting a decent education so that they can mature, develop, grow into healthy, wholesome citizens. It would mean families safe from traffickers. What about the traffickers? What about those who feed into the economy of human trafficking? Might they also feel safer? Feel more at peace with themselves? An economy without human trafficking. Is it utopia? No, it isn't. It is the vision of a world that RENATE wants. It is the vision of a world that Talitakum wants. It is the vision of a world that I want for my children, for my country, for my family, for my world. Is it a vision of a world that you want? It's the vision of a world that Pope Francis wants us to work for. He says, human rights are violated not only by terrorism, repressions and murders, but also by extreme poverty and just economic structures that cause great inequalities. Little by little, we get used to hearing and seeing an economy that kills. We get used to the empire of money with its evil effects: drugs, corruption, human trafficking, abuse of children. These are common currency. Do we want this kind of world? No. What we want is an economy without human trafficking. It's not an impossible dream. Pope Francis says also, human trafficking is a terrible violation of human dignity. Let us open our eyes to this shameful scourge and commit ourselves to fighting it. Let's do just that. Commit ourselves to working for an economy without human trafficking.
Imelda, thank you very much indeed for that. There's some real food for thought there, and some very positive ways that we ourselves can help and do something. Because I think in light of this, sometimes we feel just so helpless and we just don't know what to do. I'm now going to invite Julia Bayton, who is an outreach worker from Refugee Women Connect here in Liverpool, to give some input now from her perspective as to her experiences and her work. So just one moment and I'll find her. Welcome, Julia. And Julia is joining us today from sunny Cyprus, although I don't think it's sunny there right now.
Not right now, but it has been today. Thank you. Yeah, I've been really lucky. So I want to thank you for inviting me along today, and really wanted to thank Sister Imelda. When I heard that she was going to be speaking and I looked at the work that she does, it was of particular interest to me because a large number of the women that we work with who've survived trafficking are of Albanian origin. There's a really strong link there. In fact, it's nearly a fifth of the women that we support in our specialist anti-trafficking project who come from Albania. It reflects sort of the picture across the UK. For women, Albania is the largest country of origin for victims of trafficking, and it's one of the few countries where women are far more likely than men to fall victim to traffickers. I am going to slightly go over the basics. I apologise if some of you know this bit, but I think it's important. First of all, that we understand exactly what modern slavery and trafficking are. So UK's National Crime Agency describes modern slavery as holding a person in a position of slavery, servitude, forced or compulsory labour, or facilitating their travel with the intention of exploiting them soon after. And that last bit is the bit that is really to do with trafficking. So trafficking is a form of modern slavery, which involves moving people for the purpose of exploiting them. And that can happen across borders from one country to another, but can also happen within a country. And of course, there are lots of different types of exploitation, and Sister Imelda has mentioned quite a few of them. Obviously, sexual exploitation is perhaps the first one that comes to mind, and certainly amongst Albanian survivors of trafficking who end up in the UK, it is the most common kind. 2/3 of them have been exploited sexually. But it's not uncommon for a person to be exploited in multiple ways. So a woman who's being exploited through domestic servitude, for instance, may also be exploited sexually. I should say that amongst child victims of trafficking, that is not the case. For children, labour exploitation is overwhelmingly the largest category, because that includes criminal exploitation. And most victims in the UK are involved in county lines, which I think probably a lot of you know, but it's where children are used to move drugs across the country. So one of the challenges in supporting people who've experienced trafficking is that they may well not view their experiences as exploitation. A woman who's exploited over many years, working very long hours for almost no pay and without the freedom to leave and find another job, may just consider herself to have been really unlucky and to have a bad job. And it can take a lot of work to convince people who've experienced that kind of treatment that they are entitled to better, and that the person exploiting them was actually doing so against the law. Another relatively common scenario is a woman fleeing her home to escape a situation such as forced marriage or persecution, perhaps based on sexuality or religion, and paying someone to smuggle her out of her home country. But once in the hands of the smugglers, being assaulted, and then moved from one country to another so that the smugglers can continue exploiting her. And whereas smuggling is voluntary, and in this case, the journey did begin by someone paying to be smuggled out of their country, the exploitation and the forced movement of a person in order to carry on exploitation is absolutely a form of modern slavery. But it's easy to imagine how a woman might blame herself for ending up in that situation and be fearful of seeking help from the authorities if she thinks that she herself has done something wrong. So at Refugee Women Connect, we work with female asylum seekers and refugees and their children across the city region of Liverpool. And when people are moved out of the region by the Home Office, we offer ongoing support as they move elsewhere, usually around the northwest. Many of the women that we support within our specialist anti-trafficking project have first attended one of our drop-ins. Unfortunately, these days they're all virtual, and disclose their trafficking experience during a conversation with a member of staff or with a volunteer. But we also receive referrals from solicitors, from the local council and from charities. And not all victims of trafficking are also asylum seekers, but the majority have or will end up claiming asylum in the UK. So you might wonder why, if we're a specialist charity working only with women dealing with asylum seekers who very often have experienced trauma, we need a specialist project within the charity to support victims of trafficking. But the fact is that people who survive trafficking have multiple challenges to face. In addition to the traumatic events they've experienced, they need to decide, for instance, whether they wish to report the crime to the police. They need to decide whether they wish to enter the National Referral Mechanism, the NRM, which is a UK government framework to support victims of trafficking. And if they do enter the NRM, they will end up engaged in two parallel legal processes. So they would have an asylum claim and a trafficking claim. And obviously being involved in one legal process is quite a challenge, but two at the same time is particularly problematic. So there are advantages to entering the NRM. It provides women with financial support and accommodation if they're destitute, and a caseworker from a specialist support service for a minimum of 45 days of what's called a rest and recovery period. But unfortunately, a lot of referrals are made into the NRM, not by support services, but by the Home Office and police. And women are often not informed about the process. They might not actually consent to being referred, and very often may not even actually be aware that they have been referred into the NRM. So we come across a really high number of poor quality referrals, which often results in women not getting the benefit of the referral, not actually receiving the support that's supposed to come, and not being aware that the data about their experiences, their story, is now being shared with the Home Office and its agencies. So data collection about modern slavery is actually one of the key purposes of the NRM, but that is rarely explained to women when they're looking at whether or not to be referred. Another challenge which many of the women we work with face is an inability to talk about their story, perhaps even enough for the referral to be completed. So that means that some choose not to enter the NRM. And for others, that 45-day period may well not be long enough before they're asked to provide greater detail for the sort of second stage assessment of their trafficking claim. So a lot of the women that we work with feel that they actually have very few options. Life in the UK is really difficult without the ability to work, without access to mainstream benefits or to choose where you live, and obviously cut off from friends and family back home. But returning home, as Sister Imelda has said from her work with people returning to Albania, can also be very difficult. There can be a lot of shame and stigma associated with returning to your family and to a community where you might not be accepted. Your life may be at risk, or you may be at risk of being re-trafficked. So in Refugee Women Connect, what we do is provide holistic support to women who've experienced trafficking. The first thing we do is make sure that they are in safe accommodation away from the area where they've been exploited. And we do that working with our partners. So if they're asylum seekers, that's working with the Home Office. If they're in the NRM, working with City Hearts, a specialist support organisation that works in the Northwest. And if neither of those things apply, working with the council. We provide legal information. We explain to women what the NRM is, what the implications are, what it will involve for them, so that they can make an informed decision about whether or not that's a choice they want to take. We provide social support, which might be things like workshops to help people get engaged in learning English or participating in yoga or art activities. It might just be helping someone by making a phone call to a GP because they need an appointment and they don't have the language skills or the confidence to do that. Or advocating for them, chasing up on services when they're slow to deliver. We make regular welfare checks on the women in the anti-trafficking programme. They obviously at the moment is particularly important because we're all isolated at home, but for women who've experienced trafficking, even more isolated, for their own safety, very often they have limited contact with the outside world, limited contact with friends and family back home. We make referrals for specialist support, such as counselling. We have a mental health team within Refugee Women Connect, as well as a casework team. But obviously, we also work with a lot of other agencies that provide specialist support. And we connect them to solicitors. It is difficult to find legal aid solicitors to work on immigration cases. There is a real shortage, but we are lucky to have really fantastic partners in Liverpool and solicitors who are experienced in working in trafficking cases. And if people decide to enter the NRM, then we will support them through that process by helping them taking the statement so that they don't have to go through their story with somebody unfamiliar to them, for instance, somebody from social services. We will take the statement and pass it to social services to make a referral on their behalf. So at present, all of the women who have been decided to be referred into the NRM from our project have received positive decisions. In other words, they've been accepted as potential victims of trafficking and received support. Some of them choose to leave the project at that stage because they're being supported by specialist organisations. Others wish to keep contact with us, and the move towards independence is a bit more gradual. And about a quarter of the women choose not to enter the NRM. So we provide intensive support to them for as long as it's required. On average, they remain in the project for between 6 months and a year. And we are a small team, very committed. All of us do other early action work around asylum, the asylum process and legal information around that in Refugee Women Connect. And you can imagine that it's sort of demanding work in terms of time commitment, but there is no other organisation offering this kind of holistic support to women, and we know that it's really valued by the women we work with. So the last bit, I'm going to reiterate some of what Sister Imelda said at the very end of hers, which is what can I do to help? I will put a disclaimer, I was asked to say this, so it's not just that I'm asking for favours. First thing, remember us, remember what we've talked about tonight, and share that knowledge with other people. That is really important. Be aware that modern slavery happens in many settings. Not everybody who's being exploited works in prostitution, and as Sister Imelda mentioned, car washes, nail bars was on my list as well. Those are common settings where you might come across people who are being exploited. Be aware of the kind of signs that you might see. So you might observe that people appear to be unpaid or paid very little, that they appear to have untreated conditions, possibly due to limited access to medical care. They may seem to be in debt of someone, may be fearful of the police or of their trafficker or of their employer. They may be fearful of telling other people about their situation and have limited freedom of movement. And they may be regularly moved to avoid detection. So much as women being moved around the hotels in Tirana, you will see women being moved around different branches of businesses in this country. The next thing you can do is invite us to your events like this so that we can talk about it and that more people are aware of what might be happening. I think the most important thing that you can do for somebody who may have experienced trafficking, absolutely, is to give them our details and encourage them to get in touch, either with us or with another support organisation. And I'll share some information afterwards. With organisations that support men and women across the country, as well as children. Volunteer. we can absolutely find a use for your skills, and any other charity would say the same. You don't need to have any specialist information. A lot of the support that the women we work with need might be an English conversation class, or, as I mentioned, a workshop to enable them to start to form friendships. And you can fundraise for organisations like Refugee Women Connect. And if you do even one of the things from that list, I'd be over the moon. Thank you.
Julia, thank you so much. It's been, it's such a harrowing thing to have to talk about. And I think being able to know what to do, again, as I said to Imelda, I think it empowers us. And thank you so much for coming this evening and sharing your witness and your information with us. Right. We're now going to move on to a bit of a quiz. So this is a bit of a time now where we can perhaps, we've heard quite a lot of things that perhaps have disturbed us. And the quiz is still got some very hard-hitting facts and figures here. Imelda might have helped with one of the questions, as you'll see in a moment. But we offer this to you to start thinking as well of what you do know and what needs to be done before. So I'll just pass over to Nadine, and then I will open the quiz for you. You need to unmute though, Nadine, that does help.
This is true. Spends all my life telling other people to unmute and then forget to do it myself. Good evening, everybody. There isn't obviously are right answers to this, but this is more about making us think about slavery in our lives. I am speaking to you using a computer. Undoubtedly, there are components in this computer and on my mobile phone which have been acquired by the use of bonded labour, trafficked labour, and slavery. So it's a very short quiz. There are only 4 questions, and it doesn't matter if you get the answers wrong. In fact, maybe that might help. So we'll go to first. I should say that these answers have been taken mostly from the Global Slavery Index and also from the most recent reports from the Office of National Statistics and the Home Office report that was published very cunningly just as we went back into lockdown at the end of October, so nobody read it, which is the want of burying news. So that's where the answers have been taken from. I will put all the links to that in the chat for anybody who wants to read the report. You'll probably find the Global Slavery Index one the easiest read in terms of understandability, but be warned that its statistics tend to be painted with a broad brush. Thank you.
So I'm now going to launch the polling. So if you'd like to see it on your screen and select your answers, hopefully you can see it. to you.
Thank you. So we look at question 1.
Mm-hmm.
And I think everybody pretty much got the answer to this, which was a surprise. The other 3 figures are important. 5,144 are the total number of prosecutions taken for slavery and trafficking offences across the whole of the United Kingdom in 2019. 6,985 are the total number of people that went through the national referral process in that year. And 13,000 is the Home Office estimate of how many people were enslaved in the United Kingdom in 2018, which they admitted was perhaps, and I quote, a slight underestimate. The Global Slavery Index for the same year has 136,000 people enslaved, bonded labour, forced marriage, sex trade, etc., adds up to roughly 136,000. It is a guesstimate because they couldn't get access to it. Anything to do with modern slavery is a guesstimate, but it's a very informed estimate. The Global Slavery Index compiles figures for every country they can get access to, and this is what they think. So this is number 2. Now, I hope this was explanatory. This is stuff that's being imported, stuff we're buying that's being imported. It may be one of the good benefits of Brexit. We can't get anything into the country. But there's the figure. So that's 9 billion, over 9 billion pounds worth has probably been done on the back of, that's just apparel and clothing. And that's mainly from countries such as Argentina, Brazil, China, India, Malaysia, Thailand, and Vietnam. The laptops, computers, and mobile phones are probably a given. It's not just China and Malaysia, it's also places like the Congo where they mine for cobalt and coltron, and you can't run a laptop or a touchscreen phone without coltron. Fish is again China, Ghana, Indonesia, Japan, Russia, South Korea, Taiwan, and Thailand. Cocoa is Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, and rice is Indian and Myanmar. I'm so glad you all got this wrong. A lot of people got this wrong. So UK, most people who are enslaved in the UK are from the UK, especially if you factor in the number of children who are being exploited and enslaved within the county lines criminal system and other criminal gangs. In terms of sex trade, it's Albania, followed by Nigeria, Vietnam and China, both for illegal actions such as cannabis farming, but also for everything from doing the washing up in your Chinese takeaway to nail bars that we all know about. And I think if anybody's got this question wrong, you weren't listening to Sister Imelda. Shame on you. That's a that whole decade of a rosary for you. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Nadine.
I'll put the links in the chat so that you can check it out for yourself.
And Terry is one of the co-chairs of the commission and is also part of St Anne and St Bernard's in South Liverpool's Justice and Peace group, and is very kindly going to look at the chat and put some questions to Imelda and Julia.
So if anybody has got any questions, if you post them up on the chat.
I wondered whether it's more likely to have slaves making clothes and goods for cheap brands than for expensive brands. Or, I mean, would you, if you buy things from John Lewis, say, are you going to be more likely to have the things made by properly paid people?
No.
Or is it so common that anyway?
I don't know any sort of statistics, to be honest, but what
Yeah.
I do know is that under UK legislation, all companies are, have a duty to verify that their supply chain is free of a modern slavery. And if you look on any or company's website, so like John Lewis website, you'll see at the bottom of the screen a modern slavery statement. It has to be there by law.
Right.
And obviously, you know, we saw the issues in Leicester. It's not to say that the company that I won't name, but which has been, you know, involved in that doesn't have a statement. I'm sure it does. What I would say is you probably have a sense of which companies might be more likely to stick to the word, if you like. But some companies do have a very comprehensive policy, and as I say, you can read them all on their website.
Just to add to that, if I may, Terry, to
Yes,
say
indeed.
that in Australia, they've now developed an app. They're the first country in the world, and you could go into this app and they have actually done a research on every single company that sells in Australia for their, what they call their footprint, their squeaky clean and anti-trafficking footprint right down the supply chain. I'm afraid in Britain they haven't done that, and even though they signed the act, it doesn't actually say that they've done it right down the supply chain, I'm afraid.
Yeah, there's some questions that I'm just looking at from the chat. Somebody has made the point, and perhaps like your comment, that they know of asylum seekers who work in car washes, because I suppose, in fact, they shouldn't be working at all. It's illegal. And he said, but they can't manage on the £5 a day they're given. And the person asking the question says, what should we do?
Julia.
I would say that we don't know for certain, you know, whether or not those people working there are genuinely, you know, asylum seekers and living on £5 a day, but either way they're being exploited. Whether or not the people themselves feel that they need to do that because they're in a situation where they have no other choice. You know, if someone's being paid nothing, being paid very little to work, then they're being exploited, and the people doing that are committing a criminal act. So if it's something that we feel really strongly about, we're far better lobbying the government to make the rates of asylum support livable.
Yeah, I would also report it to the helpline. If you have any doubt, any questions, you report it, and it's confidential, so you're safe. Isn't that right, Julie, in Britain? Yeah.
Yeah, there's a modern slavery helpline, which you can call even just for advice. And I mean, maybe I'll send it to Helen afterwards, but I did also share somewhere in the chat just a picture with contact details for support organisations, which also includes support for victims as well as reporting crimes.
It's the same principle as child protection. You know, when in doubt, report it. Yes?
There's a question being asked specifically about the situation in Albania. Somebody has asked, in fact, what percentage of women who are rescued from this do you find, or is there a percentage that you find returning to it?
I think most Albanians are, not all, are trafficked abroad. And the problem, say, with the English law, and we have many, many Albanians trafficked in England, as has already been said by Julia. The problem with the law is that if they are defined by the NRM as trafficked, as Julia said after that, in most situations, they have to fend for themselves. They become, if they're foreigners, asylum seekers. And unfortunately, in their particular situation, because they can't stay on at the shelter, they actually are semi-abandoned, and it's something that we're looking at in our new foundation. This is the group that are the most needy. And we've spoken to Snowdrop, which is in Sheffield, and we've spoken to Hestia in London, which looks after survivors. And there is a massive problem, both pre-NRM and post-NRM, in being re-trafficked. We haven't got numbers. There are many, many that don't even go through NRM that are re-trafficked. And this is not just sexual exploitation. I have many stories of people I even know in Britain that are in prison now because they've been involved by the traffickers in petty crime, and they go down the long route and then they get out of prison and they're re-trafficked. So in Albania itself, those that come back, or those that have been trafficked in Albania, maybe students who are too poor and they go into the sex industry and then they're trafficked from there. They generally don't, because they're followed through for 3, 4, 5, 10 years in Albania. There's no limits to the time they are accompanied. So I don't hear of that in Albania, but yes, abroad, indeed.
We have a question here which somebody asked, which I think is a very interesting question. Can we make a link between modern slavery and the concept of fair trade?
Do you want me to respond before you, Julie, or would you respond first?
No, go right ahead.
Yeah. I think that the link between fair trade and slavery was the main topic of our wonderful discussion in the breakout room. And I'd love some of those guys to be responding to this, because they were so eloquent about it all. Of course, there is a link, because if you do decide to go down the route, I'm going to now just quote what I heard from my lovely companions. They talked about the young people of today being from a different generation, and that they are actually recycling, they're repairing, they're renewing, they're buying better so that it lasts. Pretty well all of that group were totally committed to fair trade. And the questions they asked each other was, what about those who are too poor to buy fair trade? And what do they do about that? And then this question of the young people going down a different road to their parents and grandparents, because they're aware they somehow, the new generation coming up has a different, has a very clear ethical road, really, they're saying. And that I was very heartened by the possibilities for the future. Sorry, Julia.
Julia, do you want to comment?
It's probably something you know a lot more about. I was going to say that the Fair Trade Foundation specifically does have a prohibition on use of forced labour and most child labour in their supply chains. And they are also trying to do some work to kind of tackle the inequalities that are at the heart of modern slavery. So they certainly, you know, if you buy fair trade, I would say you are reducing your risk of your purchases having a history of exploitation, but you can't guarantee it.
Yes, the group said that too.
And
couldn't guarantee it.
I think we're getting closer. I think I've been told we can have one more question. So I think, do you feel there is a greater preponderance of slavery in countries where there is a bigger gap between rich and poor? And then I've got 2 comments to make before we end.
Personally, working with RENATE right across Europe in 31 countries, and being connected with the networks of sisters right across the world, and therefore having intercontinental dialogue on trafficking, there is absolutely no doubt, if you had a map, I have got a map and I'd love to have shown it you, where you can see the routes of the traffickers, and you can see countries of origin, countries of transit, countries of destination. And the countries of origin are pretty well 90% more from the very poor parts of the world. Haiti, Asia, parts of that part of the world have high percentage of traffic victims, and especially children in the brickworks and all sorts of slave labor and child soldiers and so on in Africa. But the countries of destination are pretty well all the rich part of the world. So that's my experience, yeah.
Julia, do you want to comment on that?
Only to say that slavery relies on desperation. You know, it's very hard to exploit somebody if they're not desperate. So yes, for not necessarily great disparities of wealth within a particular country, but between the countries, as Sister Imelda said, of origin and destination, absolutely.
Well, I'd like to thank you. I'm sure, and I just wanted to pick up two comments from the chat. One was a suggestion that we perhaps ask our Archbishop, those of us in Liverpool, for the Archdiocese to have a robust anti-trafficking, anti-slavery policy. I just thought I'd record that. And the other point is somebody has reminded us about an organisation called Ethical Consumer, which I think is worth looking at, because in a sense that's what it's about, isn't it? It's about being ethical consumers. Okay, I'll hand you back now to Helen.
Okay, thanks very much. Thank you very much, Terry. Julia and Imelda, thank you so much for this evening. I think it's been really enlightening for all of us. And I'm delighted as well that we were able to meet, so at least some groups were able to meet and make that contact, which is so important. So thank you so much for being with us and for your very sensitive way of showing us the reality, which is not nice to hear, but is one that we need to take on board and do our bit, however small that might be, in order to stop this.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you for inviting us.
Yes, indeed.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Imelda.
Well, now I'm just going to, hopefully those of you who are left, we've still got our candles. So I'm going to pass over to Terry Madden, who is a priest in Liverpool 1, and he's one of the missionaries of Africa.
So I have just lit my candle. I invite you all to light yours. Candle of commitment that we will do what we can, not only to see and seek out and see the slavery and the trafficking, but find ways to help free those who are oppressed through trafficking and slavery. And let us pray. O God, when we hear of children and adults deceived and taken to unknown places for purposes of sexual exploitation, forced labor, and organ harvesting, our hearts are saddened and our spirits angry that their dignity and rights are ignored through threats, lies, and force. We cry out against the evil practice of this modern slavery and pray with Saint Bakhita for it to end. Give us wisdom and courage to reach out and stand with those whose bodies, hearts, and spirits have been so wounded, so that together we may make real your promises to fill these sisters and brothers with a love that is tender and good. Send the exploiters away empty-handed to be converted from this wickedness, and help us all to claim the freedom that is your gift to your children. Amen.